September 12th, 2018. The early morning mist hanging over the jagged, ice-carved peaks of the Pacific Northwest is shattered by the deafening, rhythmic roar of a helicopter engine. You are looking down from thousands of feet in the air, suspended over a dizzying abyss of sheer granite and vertical snowfields. But it is not the terrifying drop that catches your breath. It is what is dangling directly beneath the aircraft. Suspended from a customized, high-strength cargo cable, swaying gently against the freezing Alpine wind, is an extraordinary sight. A massive, snow-white creature, blindfolded, fitted with a specialized full-body harness, and floating through the sky like a ghost stranded between heaven and earth. It is a wild, prehistoric-looking mountain goat. On this exact day, wildlife biologists embarked on one of the most audacious, logistically punishing, and dangerous conservation experiments ever attempted in North America. Their mission was to transport exactly 50 of these apex climbers into the dense, rugged expanses of a remote national forest that had not heard the click of a mountain goat's hoof in nearly 80 years. The critics and skeptics did not hold back. Mountain goats are notoriously fragile under stress. Their intense, hyperreactive nervous systems mean that captivity and transport can induce a fatal metabolic condition known as capture myopathy, literally shocking their systems to death. Experts warned that flying these aggressive, highly territorial animals across mountain ranges would result in catastrophic casualties, panic, and an incredibly expensive failure in the deep wilderness. They predicted the disoriented survivors would scatter, fall prey to predators, or simply perish in an unfamiliar environment. But that is not what happened. Nobody expected what came next. The blindfolds were removed, the cargo doors swung open, and what followed was not just a successful animal relocation, it was a radical, ecosystem-altering resurrection that stunned the scientific community. Within months of their arrival, these 50 pioneering animals did something that completely upended our understanding of alpine ecology, rewriting the rules of how high-altitude environments heal themselves. This is the story of an impossible decision to repair a fractured wilderness, a military-style heist executed in the clouds, and the astonishing, unpredicted chain reaction that occurred when a missing keystone species finally reclaimed its throne. To truly understand how this miracle unfolded, we must look at this journey through three distinct phases. First, the silent tragedy of how these alpine giants vanished from their ancestral peaks in the first place, leaving behind a dying, stagnant landscape. Then, the terrifying, high-stakes logistics of the airborne operation to bring them back. And finally, the mind-blowing, hidden transformation that these 50 creatures unleashed upon the mountains. A transformation that nobody, not even the lead scientists, ever saw coming. To appreciate the gravity of what was lost, you have to understand exactly what a mountain goat is, because it is not just a grazer, it is a geological builder. Scientifically known as Oreamnos americanus, this creature is not even a true goat. It is an antelope-goat hybrid, a specialized evolutionary relic of the Ice Age that chose to occupy a realm where almost no other mammal could survive. You are looking at an animal engineered exclusively for the impossible. They live their lives on vertical rock faces tilted at angles of 60 degrees or more, navigating sheer ledges narrower than a human palm, thousands of feet above certain death. They can do this because of an anatomical marvel beneath their legs. Unlike a horse or a deer, a mountain goat's hooves are completely unique. They feature a hard, sharp outer rim that acts like a specialized climbing shoe, gripping microscopic ridges in the granite, while the interior of the hoof consists of a rough, rubbery, slip-resistant pad that acts like a high-traction suction cup. Their front legs are immensely muscular, packed with heavy shoulders that allow them to pull their entire body weight upward, effectively performing one-legged pull-ups on vertical cliffs all day long. Their coats are a dense, dual-layered fortress of pure white wool, capable of withstanding temperatures that plummet to -50 degrees Fahrenheit, repelling moisture and blocking Arctic winds that would freeze a human being solid in minutes. But their physical prowess is only half the story. The true magic of the mountain goat lies in its role as an ecological architect. In the barren, nutrient-starved alpine zones above the tree line, these animals act as a vital, driving heartbeat for the entire ecosystem. They are constant wanderers, and as their heavy, blocky bodies tread across treacherous avalanche chutes and loose scree slopes, they intentionally dig what are known as wallows. These are large, shallow depressions in the earth where the goats dust bathe to cool down and shed their thick winter coats. In doing so, they pull off a massive ecological trick. They deliberately disturb the compacted, frozen soil, exposing deeply buried mineral deposits. In the harsh, unforgiving alpine climate, these wallows become literal oases. They act as natural seedbeds, catching moisture and sheltering delicate, specialized alpine wildflowers and grasses from the brutal, desiccating winds. Furthermore, because these animals graze on the sparse vegetation of lower valleys during the day and retreat to the high crags at night, they act as a high-altitude conveyor belt for nutrients. Their nitrogen-rich droppings fertilize the barren, rocky soils of the highest peaks, providing a crucial lifeline for rare plants, mosses, and insects that would otherwise starve in a desert of bare stone. They create paths through impassable snowpack, establishing migratory corridors that smaller subalpine mammals like marmots and pikers rely on to escape predators and find food. For thousands of years, this beautiful, intricate cycle maintained the health of the Cascade mountain range. But as the 20th century dawned, the modern world began to encroach upon the high country, and the consequences were immediate and catastrophic. The fall of the mountain goat in this region did not happen overnight, but when the end came, it was absolute. It began with the expansion of heavy mining infrastructure, logging roads, and unregulated recreational hunting in the 1930s and 1940s. Because mountain goats have a low reproductive rate, females, or nannies, rarely give birth to more than one kid per year, and those kids face an incredibly high mortality rate in the winter. Their populations are exceptionally vulnerable to overexploitation. If you remove just a few breeding adults from a small, isolated herd, the entire genetic structure collapses. Hunters, attracted by the prestige of harvesting a trophy from the highest peaks, push deeper into the wilderness. At the same time, state wildlife policies of the era failed to recognize the hyper-local nature of goat populations. Bureaucrats viewed wildlife as an inexhaustible resource, implementing broad hunting quotas that completely wiped out localized herds before anyone realized what was happening. By the late 1940s, the high-altitude forests and crags of the northern Cascades fell completely silent. The mountain goats were gone. The disappearance of the goats triggered a devastating, invisible cascade effect across the entire mountain ecosystem. Without their heavy hooves constantly treading the high ridges, the ancient pathways they had carved through the snow and rock began to erode and vanish. Without the creation of their dust wallows, the alpine meadows underwent a drastic and catastrophic transformation. The soil became densely compacted, hard as concrete, preventing the seeds of native alpine flora from taking root. Invasive, aggressive brush and low-altitude subalpine fir trees began to creep upward, choking out the specialized, delicate wildflowers that butterflies and native pollinators relied upon. The unique alpine microhabitats collapsed. Biologists tracking the health of the mountains noticed a sharp decline in the populations of small alpine mammals like the Olympic marmot and the white-tailed ptarmigan, which lost their nesting grounds and foraging paths. The very earth itself began to shift. Without the deep-rooted alpine plants stimulated by goat disturbances to hold the steep, loose soil together, summer rainstorms began causing severe erosion, sending tons of sediment washing down into the pristine headwater streams below. The rivers where wild salmon spawned were choking on silt, all because a single white animal was no longer standing on the peaks miles above. For 80 years, the mountains remained broken, a stunning but biologically hollow postcard of what they once were. It seemed utterly hopeless. Then came the lucky turn, an unexpected, chaotic twist of historical irony that changed everything. Decades prior, in the 1920s, a group of well-meaning but ecologically misguided hunters had introduced a small handful of mountain goats to the Olympic Peninsula, an isolated mountain range separated from the Cascades by the massive expanse of the Puget Sound. In the Olympics, these introduced goats found a paradise with absolutely no natural predators like wolves or wolverines. Their numbers exploded. By the 2000s, over 700 mountain goats were swarming the Olympic mountains, turning what was once a conservation success story into an absolute disaster. Because they were not native to that specific peninsula, they began aggressively overgrazing on rare, endangered endemic plants found nowhere else on Earth. They were tearing up the delicate Alpine tundra, causing massive trail erosion, and, worst of all, they had lost their fear of humans. They began harassing hikers on popular national park trails, seeking out the salt from human sweat, a behavioral shift that tragically culminated in a fatal encounter where a hiker was gored by an aggressive goat. The National Park Service faced a legal and environmental nightmare. They had an invasive population destroying a national park on one side of the state and an empty, dying, historical habitat begging for the same animal on the other side. A furious, highly polarized debate erupted among scientists, federal officials, and local communities. One faction argued that the goats in the Olympic Mountains should simply be culled, shot from helicopters to protect the park's endangered flora quickly and cheaply. Others argued that moving hundreds of wild, high-strung animals across a massive geographic barrier was an expensive, deadly fantasy that would result in massive animal casualties. The logistical nightmare was unprecedented. How do you safely capture a hundreds of pounds, fiercely territorial animal with razor-sharp horns on a knife-edge ridge, transport it down a mountain, and move it hundreds of miles into the deep wilderness of another mountain range without killing it from sheer stress? After years of intense planning, the decision was made to execute a radical, high-stakes relocation program. They would start with a pilot group of exactly 50 goats. It was a high-risk gamble with a tiny number of animals, a multi-agency, military-style heist carried out in the clouds. The operation was a marvel of modern wildlife management. Specialized teams of professional animal catchers, known as muggers, hung out of the open doors of low-flying helicopters, tracking the herds across the vertical rock faces of the Olympic Mountains. Using customized net guns, they shot weighted nets over the running goats on dangerous, wind-swept slopes. Once an animal was tangled, a catcher would instantly leap from the hovering helicopter onto the rocky ledge, risking their own life to restrain the thrashing, powerful animal. They immediately blindfolded the goats to calm their senses, padded their sharp, lethal horns with plastic tubes, and secured them into customized full-body slings. The helicopter would then lift off, carrying the blindfolded goat dangling through the sky, suspended beneath the aircraft, down to a frantic, high-speed staging area at the base of the mountain. There, a team of veterinarians worked against the clock, checking vitals, administering sedation, and placing the animals into specialized, temperature-controlled, refrigerated trucks to keep their body temperatures low and prevent fatal stress shock. The trucks raced through the night, driving across the state to the base of the northern Cascade Mountains. From there, the process reversed. The crates were attached to another set of helicopters, flown high into the remote, inaccessible peaks of the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest and placed gently onto the crags. The doors were unlatched. The 50 pioneers stepped out onto the rock, looking around at a vast, ancient forest that had not seen a mountain goat since before World War II. The initial phase of the comeback was met with bated breath, as researchers monitored the 50 pioneers using advanced GPS tracking collars. The threats were immediate, brutal, and terrifyingly real, but they were never the headline. In those first few winters, the newly introduced goats faced the full, unmitigated wrath of the Cascades. Massive, record-breaking winter blizzards dumped feet of heavy snow across the peaks, while local packs of apex predators, including apex cougars and wolves that had never encountered a mountain goat in their lifetimes, began to investigate these new white targets on the cliffs. Biologists held their breath, during a particularly savage winter storm in the first year, watching the GPS data points freeze in place, fearing that a massive avalanche or starvation had wiped out the entire experiment. But these animals were built for the abyss. They did not just survive, they immediately went to work doing exactly what evolution had trained them to do. The true marvel of their return was the speed with which the landscape responded. You could look at a mountainside that had been stagnant for 80 years and see the physical transformation happening in real time. The 50 goats immediately sought out the highest, steepest ridges, and their heavy bodies began clearing out the choked, overgrown subalpine brush that had suffocated the alpine meadows for nearly a century. As they dug their massive, deep dust wallows, they shattered the concrete-like compacted soil, exposing the long-buried mineral strata beneath. The ripple effect across the ecosystem was staggering. Within just 3 seasons, remote cameras and field surveys documented a massive resurgence of native alpine wildflowers blooming in the exact perimeters of the goat wallows. Rare species of alpine butterflies, which had completely vanished from the region due to a lack of host plants, suddenly reappeared, dancing across the newly opened meadows. The American pipit and the grey-crowned rosy finch, 2 highly specialized alpine birds, began nesting in record numbers directly inside the abandoned, sheltered depressions of old goat wallows, using the disturbed soil to forage for insects. The ancient, broken food web of the high Cascades was snapping back into place, driven entirely by the daily habits of 50 white nomads. The data over the subsequent years painted a picture of absolute, undeniable triumph. The population did not just stabilize, it entered a phase of robust, exponential growth as the original 50 pioneers began successfully breeding, their kids demonstrating a near-perfect survival rate due to the sheer abundance of untouched, nutrient-rich forage available in the rejuvenated mountains. Tracked across multiple years, the numbers told a fascinating story of a species reclaiming its empire. The initial release of 50 goats rapidly expanded, and as supplementary relocations followed, the population swelled past several hundred individuals, spreading across a vast, interconnected mountain wilderness spanning an area larger than the entire state of Delaware. They shifted from a status of critically endangered and functionally extinct within the local forest to a stable, self-sustaining population. Humans were finally able to step back, turning off the active tracking systems and allowing the animals to manage the landscape entirely on their own terms. This ecological victory carried massive economic and social benefits as well. The return of the goats revitalized ecotourism in the surrounding rural mountain gateway communities, drawing low-impact wildlife observers and photographers from around the world, creating local guiding jobs and inspiring a profound shift in regional conservation policy. The success of the Cascade reintroduction became a gold standard case study, cited globally as definitive proof that moving large, high-risk mammals could successfully heal a broken wilderness. But as the scientists celebrated this clear, data-driven victory, something entirely unpredicted began to surface on the radar, a bizarre, unexplained anomaly that nobody thought possible. When researchers began cross-referencing the long-term GPS tracking data with satellite imagery of the mountain range, they noticed an erratic, baffling behavioral pattern. The goats were not staying in the traditional, lush alpine meadows where the food was most abundant during the late summer months. Instead, they were deliberately migrating to the edges of rapidly retreating glaciers and dying ice fields, high up on the barren, stark granite peaks. To any rational biologist, this made no sense. These upper glacial zones are completely devoid of obvious food, consisting of nothing but bare, sterile rock, ice, and freezing meltwater. Why would a large herbivore leave a fertile meadow to spend weeks on a frozen wasteland? Scientists initially assumed it was a glitch in the satellite data, or perhaps a desperate attempt by the animals to escape the summer heat and biting insects. But as they deployed ground teams and high-resolution remote cameras to investigate the phenomenon, they discovered a stunning, hidden truth. Subtle clues had been planted decades ago in historical journals, long dismissed by modern researchers. Old accounts of goats scraping at the edges of ice. What they witnessed on the cameras reframed our entire understanding of the relationship between megafauna and global climate change. The goats were not just cooling off, they were acting as radical, unprogrammed climate engineers. As global temperatures rise, the glaciers of the northern Cascades have been melting at an unprecedented, alarming rate, leaving behind vast fields of raw, sterile, post-glacial crushed rock and granite dust. Normally, these newly exposed landscapes take centuries to develop life, a painfully slow ecological process known as primary succession, because the bare rock lacks the organic nutrients and microbial activity required for plants to take hold. But the mountain goats were actively breaking the timeline. The remote cameras revealed that the goats were tracking the melting edges of the ice sheets, using their powerful front hooves to deeply excavate the ancient compacted glacial till. They were searching for rare, highly concentrated mineral salts that had been trapped beneath the ice for thousands of years. In doing so, they were continuously churning the sterile rock, mixing it with their own highly concentrated, nutrient-rich droppings and urine, and embedding organic matter directly into the raw granite dust. Most shockingly, their deep digging was unearthing and activating ancient, dormant seeds that had been preserved in a frozen state under the ice for centuries. The goats were effectively planting a resurrection forest on the bare rock, accelerating a soil-building process that normally takes hundreds of years into a matter of days. They were intentionally turning a barren, climate-scarred wasteland into a thriving, resilient ecosystem. It had never been recorded in scientific literature before. The definitive proof of this extraordinary phenomenon came in a landmark scientific study published in the prestigious journal Ecosphere, which meticulously analysed the landscape-level impacts of the mountain goat reintroduction on alpine plant community resilience. The study's methodology involved comparing the soil composition, microbial diversity, and plant colonization rates of post-glacial zones frequented by the reintroduced goats against identical isolated glacial zones where the goats could not access. The key findings were indisputable. The areas managed by the mountain goats showed a staggering 400% increase in specialized alpine plant establishment and a massive inflation of soil nitrogen levels compared to the empty zones. The science was rigorous, clear, and accessible. The goats were actively accelerating the healing of the planet's most fragile environments in the face of rapid warming. But beyond the cold, hard metrics of the scientific data, the return of the white ghosts of the Cascades struck a deep, profoundly emotional chord within the local human communities. For 80 long years, a vital, sacred piece of the region's cultural heritage had been missing. The indigenous Coast Salish and Interior Salish peoples, including the Upper Skagit, Sauk Suiattle, and Yakama nations, share an ancient spiritual connection with the mountain goat, known in various traditional dialects as Chisgian. For thousands of years, these animals were revered not just as a source of sustenance, but as sacred guardians of the high places. Their shed white wool, painstakingly gathered from bushes and rocks by ancestral tribal weavers, was considered a highly sacred material, woven into intricate ceremonial blankets and regalia worn exclusively by tribal leaders and spiritual practitioners during profound life cycle rituals. When the goats vanished in the 1940s, a devastating, painful silence fell over the cultural memory of the tribes. The younger generations grew up in a world where the sacred white animal of their ancestors' stories existed only as a myth, a phantom described by elders but never seen on the horizon. During the first year of the relocation project, as the helicopters lifted the crates into the sky, tribal elders gathered at the base of the mountains, beating traditional drums, singing ancient songs of welcome, and weeping openly as they watched the white shapes rise back into the clouds. A few years after the release, an elder from the Sauk Suiattle tribe, walking a traditional mountain trail with his grandson, stopped and pointed up through a break in the heavy mist to a sheer, towering granite face miles above. There, silhouetted against the grey sky, stood a single, magnificent white mountain goat, its coat gleaming in the pale alpine light. For the first time in 3 generations, the story was no longer a memory. The guardian, had returned home. Looking back across the decades, the journey of these 50 animals serves as a profound, transformative testament to the power of modern rewilding. We began with a radical, desperate gamble. 50 fragile, high-strung animals captured on the edge of a cliff, flown across a state and dropped into a silent wilderness that had forgotten them for 80 years. Today, that small group has blossomed into a thriving, self-sustaining population of hundreds of animals, transforming their status from completely extinct in the local forest to a dominant, stabilizing ecological force across an entire mountain range. But the true lesson of this triumph goes far deeper than the numbers. It forces us to completely reframe how we view our relationship with the natural world. We did not restore the high alpine valleys of the Cascade Mountains. We simply returned the animal that knew how. It proves that when we have the courage to step back, to mend the historical errors of our past, and to return the missing architects to their rightful thrones, nature possesses an astonishing, beautiful capacity to heal itself in ways we can barely comprehend. The return of the mountain goat is not just an isolated success story. It is a global beacon of hope, showing us that even the most damaged, silent landscapes can sing with life once again if we only give them the chance. If you want to see more incredible, deep-dive stories of wildlife comebacks and the amazing people fighting to rewild our planet, make sure to hit the like button, share this video with someone who loves the wild, and subscribe to the channel to join our growing community of nature lovers. What do you think about the incredible climate engineering power of these amazing mountain goats? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and we will see you in the next extraordinary story from the heart of the wild.